And it is my honor and privilege to serve today as a moderator and welcome you to the first webinar on internet resilience in Africa in the context of COVID-19. This first webinar is co-organized by the African Union Commission, the African Telecommunications Union, and Internet Society. And thank you, those partners, special thank you for making it happen. As I was saying, this is the first webinar of the series of those the stakeholders and partners of Africa, plan to organize in the course of the year. Each of the webinar will address specific topic related to the internet resilience, i.e. spectrum, universal access, alternative connectivities, affordabilities, and so on. But before going to the substance, and I would like to start by two prayers. One is that you and your loved ones are all safe. And second one, I will pray that you will be continuing to having a resilient connectivity today and a stable electricity power, which I don't have. In addition to safety and security, there is two things now that are go hand in hand: connectivity and power supply. Resilience is the ability to provide and maintain acceptable level of services in the face of faults and challenges to normal operations. COVID-19 has proven that ICT networks are vital infrastructure at all layers and all levels. As millions of people go online for teleworking, telemedicine, and distance learning, total internet hits have surged between 50% and 70%. Would you please excuse me just 1 minute? Jamal, could you please copy and make sure that Mr. Bedda is connected? He's calling. Could you please call him and make him connected, please? As I was saying, the number of cyber attacks has really surged, and the number of the level of use of internet within the continent has been increased from 60 to 70%. The number of attacks has jumped 5 times, as has been noticed by the WHO, and there is now an imperative necessity to use the technology applications for tracing. And it happened that people also are really very much concerned about the challenges for the privacy and human rights activities are actually really having a lot of concerns. So the purpose of these webinars really is to assess Africa internet readiness in such events like COVID-19, to reflect on lessons learned, challenges, and successes in many situations. And then as an outcome, we wish to have specific recommendations on something that we have to do immediately, and some policy recommendation for best practices on internet resilience during this COVID-19. Without further ado, I would like to invite Howie or Varangai, one of them, to display the agenda we do have. Please do it. We were supposed to start with the speech from the African Union Commission to be done by Mr. Sheikh Bedda on behalf of the African Union Commission. He's trying to be connected, and I have Jamal connected. I hope he will be connected. But after his speech, we will be certainly moving to you as a panelist. And thank you again for accepting to be part of this really webinars. There is a few rules I want to really use the opportunity to recall. Some rule of engagement, if I may say. When you are not speaking, please mute your mic. This is very important. We do have French and English interpretation, 2 from French. Participants may also post their questions, their comments in the chat room. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed also on Facebook. If you could display the channels, please, Howie or Varangai, if you could display that one. And also we have an hashtag number. If you hashtag Please also, if you could display that too. Now, special request to our panelists. Please make sure that you are having your video all the time on. We want to see you. And if Mr. Bedda is really ready, we could really start by listening to his speech. Mr. Bedda, are you on? Jamal, is Mr. Bedda on? Jamal, do you copy, please?
Yes, Mukhtar, the director is joining.
Is joining. All right. In anticipation, Abraham, could you make him, a co-host also, so we can see him, so we can give him the floor to speak on behalf of the African Union Commission as the first item of our agenda.
Okay, Mukhtar.
All right. Mr. Bedda, are you in? So far, we have. Yes. It's not him. So far, we have 89 participants and 89 participants. We are expecting 253 who did register, really. I am just waiting for Mr. Bedda. Do we have him?
Not yet, Mukhtar.
Okay. All right. Why I wouldn't start the panel without having that opening, because we can't go back to that opening again once we start the panel. But then just for the sake of time, probably I will do something is to start by introducing you, the panelists, and then when it comes to your turn, I won't have to repeat that. That will be probably the idea. I have to save time. Now, let me start with the first panelist, just to introduce him briefly. It's Mr. Eddie. All right. The first panelist will be Mr. Eddie Kayihora, and you see here he has another name, which is actually his real name. He's not actually being not hidden anywhere. And to mention that he's the CEO of AFRINIC. He was appointed in 2019. He has over 20 years of experience in telecommunication, financial technology, fintech, and IT infrastructure. Eddie will be specifically talking to us about the significant change of internet traffic in Africa since the COVID-19. Our second speaker will be Dawit Bekele, the Vice President, the Regional Vice President for Africa. Mr. Dawit, everybody knows him. Everybody who deals with the internet in Africa knows him. Prior joining ISOG, Dawit worked as a teacher, a lecturer at Addis Ababa University, teaching and researching on computer science. He started there in 1994. The third speaker will be my sister, Mrs. Funke Opeke, CEO of Main One. Funke Opeke is the founder and CEO of Main One. Main One is the West African leading business-to-business communication and network solution provider that built regions, that built the first region, actually, the first region's open access submarine cable system interconnecting Lagos, Nigeria, Africa, Ghana, and to Portugal. In 2010, a $240 million project that was completed in time and on budget. In January 2015, the company launched operation of MDXI, which is a 40 million investment resulting in West Africa's largest tier 3 data center, which currently host major global indigenous content. We love those institutions. Actually, we are really providing African content. The next speaker will be then Mr. John Omo. He was elected during the 5th ATU Conference of Plenipotentiaries in 2018. He is leading now the continental body entrusted with building consensus within African countries on ICT development, including on matters of policy and regulations, capacity building, also coordination of the African proposals at international ICT forum, such as ITU. He's a lawyer and has a 20 years experience as a lawyer. And then the other speaker, the next speaker will be then Dr. Nena. Dr. Nena is actually, and we're proud to say that he's one of our member of the AU Cybersecurity Expert Group. Nena is a lawyer and academic, specialized in law technology. She is a senior lecturer of law and technology at the Hillary Rodman Clinton School of Law, Swansea University, United Kingdom. She was in Ghana recently, and before joining this position, she was at Lancaster University as Ghana. She is actually teaching cybercrimes and intellectual property law. Very interesting things. Then she will be followed by Hussam El Gamal. Hussam is the chairperson of Africa Information and Communication Technologies Alliance, AFICTA, which is a private sector-led alliance of associations, multinational corporation companies, organizations, and institutions in the ICT sector in Africa. Hussam has more than 20 years of professional experience in ICT, both in private and public sectors. He was selected in 2013 by UN Secretary General as a member of MAG. In 2015, he was selected by the Egyptian Prime Minister to share the cabinet on information and decisions to support the IDSC. Hussam is really currently focused on achieving prosperity by capitalizing on technology transfer and localized creative project serving the 2030 SDGs. And our last but not least speaker will be then Andile, the founding partner and chairman of Convergence Networks. He has previously been the Director General of the Department of Communication in South Africa until 2013. This is where everybody start knowing him and knowing all these competency in what he has done for South Africa at that point of time was very good. At the DUC, indeed, Andile was responsible for policy formulation, conceptual development and implementation of ICT sector in Africa, in the Southern African region. In addition to being to his appointment to the board of investee in several companies, including those one of Convergence Partners, Andile holds and has held a number of positions on global and local bodies and serves as an executive chairman of Dimension Data Middle East and Africa. I hope by just presenting them at this point of time, I will not be able to redo it again, and I will just hand it over to them right away to speak. And with that, I will just want to invite Mr. Bede, if he's in, to give his remark on behalf of the African Union Commission. Mr. Bede, are you in? Mr. Beda. Jamal, do we have Mr. Beda?
Not yet, Mukhtar.
Okay, then let's just then start by our, we cannot wait and we cannot waste a lot of time. Over to you, Eddie. Eddie, can you please just tell us really how was there any significant change in internet traffic in Africa since the COVID-19 outbreak? How did really the internet cope with those changes? Over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Muk. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
So I'd like to appreciate again your invitation to this panel. And on this very important discussion that is talking about our resiliency. So as we all saw during the pandemic when it started, that most of us started to use internet even more than what we've been using in the past. And it has been the general trend, even in the families where children and everyone turned towards remote participation or remote connectivity to be able to go to school, to do a lot of other things. If we go to the first slide, we can see that even in the world, this is visible when you look at the graphs. In this graph, we can see that the exchange point in Singapore and the exchange point in Dubai, UAE, all increase in terms of traffic. However, which is a normal trend, but unfortunately, when we look at the graph in the exchange points in Africa, on the second slide, we can see that the growth impacts. Can you go on the second slide, please? Yes, we can see we've taken just a sample of them, where you can see Uganda, Benin, Ghana, and Cairo. For Cairo, that's where we can see a slight increase during the period of March and April, mainly April, when there was I believe that's when the lockdown became a bit more strict. But when we look in the other countries, we don't see a trend of growth per se, which was a bit awkward for us when we were assessing the different graphs. But when you consider it in terms of connectivity, it's not that everything is, this is only showing the amount of traffic that is going through a fabric that is providing connectivity in the local space. When we consider the internet in Africa, you can see that not much is actually locally hosted. Of course, there is this caching that is available, and even the caching today don't appear much on the exchange points. So I also took some time to discuss with some of our members. We've grown to about 1,800 members now, to check what was the impact in their networks, because even if it doesn't appear on the graphs, some of them have faced growth, and mainly those who are actually serving end users. So one of them confirmed that yes, they've seen a tremendous growth, but they saw the growth mainly towards the caching solution that they have in-house, and even the regional connectivities to different exchange points where there is a lot of content within the region, which is a big step for us as Africa, showing that there is content that is coming on the continent. And I've seen that even in the Western Africa, we have this type of local content that is there. However, for some of them, they mentioned that some ISPs have been providing more services to corporate businesses. And one of them confirmed that they got 25% drop in their usage, because their members or their customers could not afford to pay, or they could not go to the office per se, or all the users shifted to the home usage. So the business usage, or the bandwidth for the business actually dropped a lot. And for some members that we also spoke to, they actually didn't see any growth in terms of usage. But in that country, I would say that the data cost is quite high. So I think when the cost is prohibitive, the users didn't flock onto the connectivity. They will continue to use it in a certain way, and not much use an increased capacity. On the next slide, I just wanted to, okay, no, this is not the one that was there. There's one slide that had a map of Africa with all the interconnection that we currently have, and the level of population. So we can see that, yes, there was a growth, but unfortunately, the growth is not that visible for all the exchange points, which don't collect all the traffic as in most of the other countries that are not in Africa. But as a general trend, we all face that we are increasing on our usage, but most of this usage is not necessarily hosted in Africa. Like this Zoom call that we do, when I started it, I realized that we generally served by the Zoom servers that are in Europe. And there is still, Africa has made a lot of progress, and it is very commendable. And this pandemic only showed that we really need to keep on pushing very hard on the improvement in our continent, so that internet would grow better and serve better the needs of our continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eddie. That was very consistent and concise in 5 minutes. Our next speaker is Dawit Bekele from ISOG. Dawit, from the user side, was there any change? Did the pandemic really change how African use the internet? Over to you in 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mokhtar. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, we have seen a major change in the use of internet since the pandemic has struck the continent. And in order to find out how much the internet usage has changed, the Internet Society conducted a survey amongst its African members. The result from 64 respondents are quite telling. In fact, we see at least 2 new phenomena. Next, please. So the first phenomenon is that, unsurprisingly, most people work from home. In fact, according to the survey, 3/4 of the respondents now work from home rather than going to work. I admit the respondents are mostly in the ICT sector, and it cannot be generalized to the whole population. But even if we consider a single sector, this is a major change. The survey also shows that the majority of them now depend on their mobile data since they don't have broadband ADSL or fiber connection at home to work or to study, which is also a shift from before the pandemic. Next, please. Another phenomenon is that more and more people are using online services since they cannot go out of their houses or they don't want to go to crowded places to get the services. In particular, we have seen an upsurge of the use of existing online services such as online banking, e-commerce, and e-government services. This is because people who resisted the use of online services until now have been in some way forced to change their attitudes. Understandably, during COVID-19, online services are sometimes the only way and often the safest way for people to access some services. E-commerce also saw an exponential growth. It is as if many Africans are discovering e-commerce. Also, most schools being physically closed, e-learning is booming during the pandemic. Of course, wherever possible, government and private companies started to work from home, including for the fight of pandemic, as the graph of the survey shows. Last, during the lockdowns, internet is being used for entertainment by people who are blocked at home and who need some entertainment. Next, please. I would also like to say a few words about how the internet performed. The internet's performance changed from the user's perspective. AD told us from the operator's perspective. Considering the massive change in the internet traffic pattern, we have seen that the traffic doesn't change in amount, but the pattern changed because people started to use it from home rather than from office, from their mobile rather than from, for example, their office networks. So considering that, the internet performed relatively well. Imagine a scenario in the offline world where the cars in a given city start going in a different direction than they usually do in just a few days. The city would be in a big chaos. Somewhat equivalent changes occurred to the internet during COVID-19. But the internet continued to perform well since, according to our survey, 22% of the respondents of the survey said that they saw a big impact on the internet, and only 30% saw a deterioration of the quality of online services. In fact, 25% even saw improvement of online services. This means that, yes, there have been some issues, but not as much as the changes that has occurred. However, deeper analysis shows that the pandemic indicates some cracks in our internet infrastructure. It showed that a very small section of African societies could access to e-learning since it can afford good connection at home. Availability of computers at households has also been a major bottleneck for e-learning and working from home. As a result, for a minority of students from well-to-do families, school continued online, while for the other students, especially those in the rural areas, there was no or little schooling during the pandemic, enlarging the gaps between the haves and the have-nots. We also saw that government and private organizations who already gave their services online survived better the pandemic than those who didn't provide their services online before the pandemic. So in conclusion, the pandemic changed the use of the internet in Africa, and very probably in a very lasting way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. And Opeke Funke, how these changes mentioned by both Eddie and David in the traffic have impacted the telecom operators, and how did you react on the change, please? Over to you in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and good day, everyone. Delighted to be on the panel this afternoon. And speaking from the operator perspective, next slide, please. What we are saying, and I think Eddie's presentation with traffic through the African internet exchanges highlights some of that, is initial higher demand for data connectivity. And where did that come from? A lot of the haves, or the high net worths in our societies, and also the formal sector, moving online, either moving business online or working from home. However, while we've seen higher demand for digital connectivity and congestion on internet networks, especially within the national or local infrastructure fabrics, and indeed the mobile last mile, what has also accompanied that higher demand for digital connectivity has been low demand for voice services based on the substantial proportion of our populations that work in the informal sector and are dependent on daily wages. So income losses in that sector have translated into reduction in voice traffic. And what we've seen in some markets is between 10 and 15% loss in voice, which is still the primary means through which most Africans communicate with each other electronically. Next slide. The reality is, and I think we've talked about the move towards digital, not only are there economic factors driving the demand, the reality is most of our networks are still poorly equipped for high data throughput. And I show this maps of 2G and 4G coverage in Nigeria, just to provide context. As you can see, the 2G map is very richly populated, with the red color showing where you have upwards of 4 operators providing 2G service. But you can see that other than extreme rural and very sparsely populated parts of the country, you do have 2G coverage, which is able to provide voice services quite adequately. On the right-hand side, you see what the 4G coverage looks like. And in a lot of our markets across the continent, 4G coverage is indeed very sparse. So the reality is we have not had the infrastructure in our markets, which are largely equipped for voice, to address any kind of shift towards a more digital economy. And there's a lot more work to be done. And to be honest, are the operators doing enough? I would say not nearly enough, but perhaps on my next slide, we can start to look at the issues a little more closely. The first one is that the increase in traffic we're seeing in data traffic is approximately 15% versus the 50% or higher that you're seeing in more higher income capacity. And as I said, one is the constraints in network capacity. Your 2G networks, your 3G networks, which are better equipped than the 4G networks, are only going to deliver so much capacity. And then you have issues of coverage and device costs, which we cannot ignore on the continent. So the reality is you require critical investments in the last mile radio infrastructure, in terrestrial fiber networks to aggregate that traffic and backhaul the traffic. However, most operators are actually starting to slow down capital expenditures as a result of COVID. Several of our currencies are being further devalued. Government spending is under pressure. Governments are looking for debt relief. So at a time when you should be seeing improvements in the infrastructure that enables digital connectivity, that spending is actually slowing down, and in some cases is being frozen by operators. The other reality is smartphone affordability is an issue. It's improving, but penetration rates for services like 4G still lag the coverage that is available because not enough of the population is able to acquire those devices, which are still largely imported into the continent. The reality is, I think from an operator standpoint and speaking for the private sector, is the enablement we need for digital connectivity. And we're seeing the criticality of that in a post-COVID world cannot be achieved solely by the private sector and is going to require more government intervention and support. I think we're starting to see some of that out of announcements I've heard from South Africa. Temporary spectrum was granted. And last week, there was discussion of a 350 billion rand funding package that would include the private sector and development finance institutions. But broadband was one of the areas where they look to provide funding. In Nigeria, we're seeing, much welcome, though perhaps late in coming, reductions in right-of-way fees that the states want to collect for operators to lay fiber. The challenge is those reductions are coming at a time when operators are cutting their capital budgets, and it's not clear how much is actually going to be built. So I think from an operator standpoint and from the private sector standpoint, I think while COVID has highlighted the need for better infrastructure, greater coverage, especially in the rural areas, interventions in terms of devices and affordability, I think it's going to require, the demand is not going to be sufficient to fundamentally change outcomes unless government and private sector engage and start coming up with specific policies and incentives to actually improve the situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. John, was Africa really, or Africa's regulatory environment ready for all these changes that have been mentioned by our previous speakers. Over to you, John, in 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mokhtar, for the honor. I hope you can see my slide. Is it on?
Yes, we can see.
Yes, it is on. Yes, John. Go ahead.
Sorry, is it on?
Yes, it is.
Thank you very much. Can I go to the second slides, please? Second slide.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. We've seen a number of movements from a policy and regulatory perspective in a number of our countries in response to this situation. And some of these range from spectrum, special spectrum assignments, licensing, type approval, tariffs and taxation measures, direct support, and digital services. Let me just give certain examples. We've seen the grant of additional spectrum for a limited period of time at no cost or reduced cost, purely as a policy and a regulatory measure in order to respond to the demand for internet services, especially in residential areas. And I'll give a few examples after this. In terms of licensing, and sometimes I wonder why we are so rigid when things are normal. We've seen a number of soft, licensing procedures, or in fact, no requirement for licensing. And so we've seen quite a number of expedited licensing for new services in order to accelerate coverage, especially in the rural areas. So we've seen a number of companies applying for, special grant of special licenses to cover certain areas that were not covered, or in fact, the government giving certain incentives for network operators to cover areas that they were hitherto not covered. In terms of type approval and type acceptance, which is oftentimes the situation in most African countries, type acceptance, this is to make services and equipment readily available in the market, especially equipment that deals with last mile connectivity. And so there's been quite a lot of type acceptance, which is essentially if it's been type approved in Europe or a standard in the US or a standard in Japan, we've seen a number of African countries saying, import it, we will approve it as it comes. And so there's been quite a lot of that in a number of our countries. Tariffs and taxation, reducing data and bandwidth tariffs and grant of spectrum for free, as I've indicated. And so we've seen in a number of our countries where government is saying for this sort of connectivity that is related to COVID-19, we will work with the operators in order to reduce, to ensure that services are available at reduced tariffs or license fees. There are surprisingly quite a number of direct support initiatives where governments and regulators, but especially regulators, have directly transferred funds to COVID-19 national initiatives. Quite impressive, I must say, especially initiatives that are dealing with connectivity. I'll give the case of Morocco in the next slide. And lastly, we've seen a couple of digital services that were not there before. Especially measures that are being undertaken through national broadcasting houses as a policy issue, as a regulatory requirement, in order to facilitate e-learning from home, especially, and I must say this has been mentioned by an earlier speaker, we don't have much connectivity for internet in our rural areas, or there's limited connectivity. And so the radio networks, the usual radio, FM radio, still provides quite a way of reaching out to those areas. And so we've seen a number of, national broadcasters in a couple of our countries being asked to provide learning on radio and on TV for such. Next slide, please. Thank you. Just to give a few examples where this has occurred, we've seen in South Africa the grant of additional spectrum at reduced cost for a limited period of time to give capacity to certain networks, especially for last mile, even for satellite services. Surprisingly, a couple of satellite companies have offered their bandwidth, their capacity to governments in order to facilitate connectivity. There's quite a bit of facilitation of financial operations. This is widespread because there's the feeling, and rightly so, that cash handling could be a means of spreading COVID-19. And so we've seen a number of our governments taking measures deliberately to facilitate online financial services, the M-Pesas of this world. And for places like Kenya, there are a threshold or certain threshold of transactions that are now being facilitated at no fees. In terms of license, we've had loan being introduced, loan technology being introduced in Kenya, an expedited licensing facility given to that company in order to facilitate bandwidth, especially for rural areas and to assist with education. I've mentioned collaboration with the national broadcaster in order to deliver education. Ghana, like South Africa, has facilitated spectrum allocation assignment to the two mobile operators, and the question that we're dealing with last week is what would happen if to this spectrum that is granted to these companies in the event there's no COVID. And so people are toying around with, do you take it back or do you give it to these companies? I think the jury is still out there in terms of what model will apply. Again, Cameroon, facilitation of financial operations online and reduced cash handling, special incentives given to mobile operators as a government policy to facilitate M-Pesa. Reduced data tariffs in Nigeria to enhance affordability. Eutelsat working to offer through a government initiative in DRC to offer capacity to facilitate online business in DRC. I think the point that I want to say in all this is that where there's a will, there's a way. And special circumstances call for special measures. We've seen a couple of special measures being undertaken in our countries to enhance connectivity. Why can't we, is it possible that African governments, African regulators can undertake expedited licensing, grant of special spectrum in order to facilitate connectivity? If it can be done under COVID, it can be done in a normal instance. Unless it distorts market forces, it's something that as policy makers, as policy implementers, we should consider implementing as a way of enhancing connectivity. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, John. Although you went 3 minutes over time, but that was very interesting. All right, no, that's fine. We will forgive you this time, but the next time we'll not allow that. Having said that, my next speaker will be then Nena. Nena, please, were there any increased cybersecurity issues in Africa due to the COVID-19? This is also part of the really concept of resilience. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mokhtar, and I'm glad to be opportune to speak on this panel. Certainly, there has been increased cybersecurity issues during the COVID-19, not just in Africa, but the world over. If we look at Dawood's presentation and other presentations, and we all know that there has been this sudden transfer to online culture everywhere in the world. The World Health Organization itself has stated that cyber criminal activities are now more than 5 times what it was when compared to what it was this same time last year. But why is Africa very important in this discussion? Can we go to the next slide, please? Yes, so the COVID-19 has further exposed Africa's cyber threat vulnerabilities, and Africa is in this position because we know certainly that there is a lack of cybersecurity legal framework in Africa. This is common knowledge. Many African countries, over half of African countries, do not have adequate cybersecurity laws. A huge number of the countries in Africa are yet to even ratify the African Union Convention on Cybersecurity. Now, there's a huge digital illiteracy. Funke highlighted some of the issues as well during her presentation. Weak cybersecurity systems, network. These are common knowledge. We have common knowledge of these issues as it affects governments, businesses, and individuals in Africa. So basically, because of poor infrastructure and some of these issues, Africa is in a vulnerable position. Now, sometime last month, there were reports that in South Africa during this COVID era, just in a period of 1 week, over 300,000 devices were attacked. In Nigeria presently, there have been reports about a cybercrime group called Silver Terror, and what they do is engage in serious cyber attacks with phishing campaigns, making it look like COVID-19 information, sending emails portraying COVID-19 informations. There are also reports from organizations like Kaspersky. You also have the Deloitte Cyber Intelligence Unit releasing reports that suggest that indeed cybersecurity issues have increased and it has taken a new dimension in Africa. First of all, we are well aware that so many individuals are looking for information related to COVID-19 every day. You now have an increase in registration of internet domains. And most of these domains are using the COVID-19 wordings, posing as charity organizations, impersonating government agencies, Center for Disease Control, impersonating NGOs and what have you, to unsuspecting African citizens. You also have an increase in phishing, increase in sending of unsolicited messages, spam messages, malwares, and all the likes. And the huge problem with this is that most of African citizens are not even digitally literate. So all of these are increased in this period. You are having more links to COVID-19 information disguised in different forms with criminal intent. So I would say that certainly, yes, there has been an increase. Can we go to the next slide as well? So looking at this, you have malware distribution using coronavirus or COVID-19 teams to lure innocent citizens. You have increased spamming, breach of personal data, website spoofing. All these are going on as reported by agencies and by individuals themselves. And one thing that is amusing about it all is that most agencies, most government agencies and organizations are unable to report these cyber breaches because of fear of losing clients and also for fear of being further compromised. So it's as if there is no information out there about what is going on. But yes, indeed, there has been an increase in cybersecurity issues. And I'll just throw in to say that our cyber resilient preparedness right now will not suffice. It will not continue to suffice after COVID-19. We need to go back and look at ways which will strengthen our cyber resilience even beyond COVID-19 period. Thank you.
Excellent. Exactly 4 minutes and 30 seconds. I love that. Osam, did really the internet help business continuity for African businesses during the lockdowns? Some say that COVID-19 is the beginning of what we call the African .coms boom. What do you think about that? Over to you in 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Okay, so basically COVID-19 showed the real importance of investing in digital transformation, and at the same time showed the challenges we are facing during the same period. Countries that were able to invest during the last few years in better infrastructure were able to benefit from this during COVID-19 period. Being in Egypt, I would say that Egypt 2 years ago had an average of 2 megabits internet speed home. Lately, it was 20 plus megabits per second, and this helped a lot in delivering the required bandwidths for working from home, for education too, for e-health application, for entertainment application, etc. And what we were doubting during the last 2 years in the investment related to, for example, Ministry of Education investment in the infrastructure, fiber optics, tablets, etc., proved to be the right thing to do, because it helped a lot continuing smoothly in delivering education at homes, etc. This brings me to an important point, in fact, in digital transformation for Africa, that it is really time to have closer collaboration and best practices sharing. Many African countries are still doubting the investment in such connectivity and infrastructure, but also in applications that serves the needs required in education and in health and in government services. And some are have already implemented successful stories that we need really to share among ourselves, especially that we come from the same challenges, the same background. And once we share those best practices, we would be able to move much faster in delivering those solutions in many African countries and convince to invest in such solution. So again, I think one of the important recommendation would be to really have a platform where we can share successful projects and best practices among African countries. But also maybe to have, and this is something that AFICTA was started already, and we are always inviting all stakeholders to support us in, is to have really an African ICT information hub where we are able to see the ICT business directories in Africa, the strategies of the African countries in making digital transformation, the best practices that are taking place. Without having this consolidated, each and every country in Africa is really putting a lot of efforts, taking a lot of risks, and replicating again projects from the start. So we need to make sure that we consolidate the information and share the return on investment altogether. It would be really an important thing to move forward. Also, maybe we have to look even further into how we are going to capitalize on Industry 4 solutions, which really has to have a good ICT or telecommunication infrastructure, but also capitalizing on IoT, capitalizing on big data, capitalizing on artificial intelligence, in order really to benefit out of the information we are gathering more and more to deliver better information. One thing that we have seen in Africa as well is that the more we need internet and application and information, we need maybe to consider more local exchange points in Africa and how we can invest in that. In all cases, in my opinion, we need, in a multi-stakeholder approach, the collaboration between the African Union Commission, and you are leading on that, with UNECA, with Smart Africa, with AFICTA, with AFRINIC, in order to be able to have a great synergy and have a better ecosystem to support growing faster ICT companies in Africa to deliver the proven to be required solution from Africa to Africa. This is what I can say.
Thank you very much, Osama. Last but not least, Andile, how did the ICT sector really contribute to the fight of the pandemic? Is there any specific action taken by your group specifically? Over to you, Andile.
Thank you, Magna.
Go ahead. In 5 minutes, please.
Are my slides?
Can you put his slide up, please? Howie or Faringai? Okay. All right.
Great.
You have it.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, again, it's a pleasure to also be invited to speak here today under this COVID environment. I mean, as a matter of action, we have built a platform called Combat COVID-19.Africa. There is the URL, please go to it and experience it. As we all know, we are living in an era of platform economics, and that the world is going to cloud, and that the new business models of both public sector and private sector will be driven by what we define as PaaS, meaning platform as a service. Combat COVID-19.Africa is a platform as a service that we have built for Africans, both in the diaspora and in the African continent. Next slide. The way in which we have structured the platform, it covers for public sector, private sector, academia, research institutions, and civil society. So at the platform, at the platform level, we are able to provide virtual machines, which are either AWS or Azure, for free for you to be able to use to do research on matters related to COVID or post-COVID issues. This is driven by digital volunteers across all these areas, such as public sector, private, academia, and civil society. It is driven by innovation, and we build solution services and products in this platform. It's an OpenStack platform built on containerization model using Kubernetes as an orchestrator. Next slide. Now, what we believe in is that us as the Africans, what we have as our currency is collaboration. I think the previous speaker indicated this, that unless we build platforms for us to collaborate in this new era of cloud, in this new era of platform economics, we cannot work in any other way. Bulk of the traffic today goes into hyperscale cloud platforms everywhere in various regions of the world. Africa today, we have regions of AWS that has just been launched in Cape Town last month, or rather in April, and we have an Azure region. So in our view, unless we embark on platform models, platform economics as a continent, by not only us as 55 countries, bring others from the diaspora and be able to make sure that African platforms that are built for Africa can be used extensively for collaboration and not work in silos. The platform is running very operational as we speak. Next slide. These are some of the areas where the users of our platform are located already. This platform has been built over 8 weeks. It is working, functional. You can be able to access it if you are a country or region, or if you want to load and work in a project together with others. It's growing very fast because we believe that platform economics is what is going to drive the future of digitalization in the continent. We build this, we're using agile model and with speed for it to be used for COVID and post-COVID environment, for it to be used for this pandemic and future pandemics, for it to be used for various startups, for various accelerators and incubators in the continent. It's available free for you to use. Thank you very much, and over to you, sir.
Thank you, Andile, very much. Thank you, Hossam. Thank you, John. Thank you, Nena. Thank you, Funke. Thank you, David. Thank you, Eddie. We've been great. You have been really providing a very consistent and straightforward, useful information related to the subject matter. At this juncture, I want to just announce that we do have around 125 participants, and we would like to hear from them. We would like to see if there is anything, any questions that has been posted in the chat room first, before allowing those who have raised hands, and I see only one so far. Victor, is there any questions from the, how can I say, the chat room in French? Victor, do you copy? Okay.
Let me
yes.
reach out to Victor.
Yeah.
Maybe
or
in the
could you on his behalf, could you go and see if you, from your side, is there any questions in the room chat, please?
Yes. Do you want me to go ahead and say them now?
Go ahead while Victor is being ready. Go ahead, Berengai.
Oh, great. I think the first question is sort of applies to the African Union, and it says, can the African Union table the issue of digital taxation to African presidents with a goal of ensuring that, one, devices are affordable or zero rated if possible, two, are manufactured within. The second question I have is partly addressed to ATU, and it says, can African regulators recognize community networks and develop favorable regulation frameworks that support their growth? The third one that is closely related to this one says, can ATU or ATU encourage African regulators to set aside the Universal Service Fund to support the development and growth of community networks? The current approach is a bit problematic. And let me pause there and check if...
Thank you very much, Berengai. Since I have the floor and there is a first question addressed to the African Union, I will then try to answer quickly to that one. Number one, yes, we have done and we will continue to do so by tabling digital transformation to the head of states. Recently in their summit, they have endorsed the digital transformation strategy for Africa. And specifically, one of the main objectives of the digital transformation strategy covers everything that more or less has been embedded into the question itself, and also by what most of our panelists has said. And I will quote from the digital transformation. By 2030, all our people should be digitally empowered and able to access safely and securely to at least 6 megabits per second all the time, wherever they live in the continent, at an affordable price of no more than 1 cent per megabit, through a smart device manufactured in the continent at the price of no more than $100, to benefit from all basic e-services and content, of which at least 30% is developed and hosted in Africa. I mean, this says a lot of what I have said. And currently, we are developing a framework for the implementation of the digital transformation strategy. And hopefully, we'll continue again this advocacy among all our stakeholders. And as Andile said, our currency is collaboration, I will add cooperation. With that, I will hand it over to John to answer to those other questions. John, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for those two questions that deal with community networks. In terms of connectivity, I would put it that any form of connectivity that facilitates connection to the underserved or unserved areas, it should be welcomed. By whatever name we call them, they may be community networks, they may be school networks, they may be, through universal access funds, those should be acceptable. Matter of fact, the idea of community as a network has been in Africa for quite a while. We have several countries in Africa that facilitate community-based radio stations. And I think the discourse about community networks needs to be highlighted. Perhaps for those that have been following the debate about community networks, it has come probably because the way we traditionally built our networks was from the core to the edge, and not from the edge to the core. And I think there needs to be a paradigm shift in terms of how do we facilitate connectivity by whatever name we call them. In terms of using universal access funds to facilitate network rollout, be they community networks, be they whatever form of networks, that has been done in quite a number of countries. The success has been, some think not so magnificent, but it depends on how you look at it. There are countries in Africa where universal access funding have been used quite well. So whatever form of connectivity we want to adopt should be welcome, be they community or whatever form of network rollout. I would support. I think the debate about community network is perhaps clouded by how it has come to Africa, largely seen in African countries as being pushed by interests outside of Africa into Africa, using African-supported community groups, and I think we need to deconstruct that and see this as something that is African, an African idea, an African-supported idea, and not so much being pushed by agencies outside of Africa into Africa as a form of connectivity. That is perhaps where we need to focus the debate. How do we domesticate this to be relevant to our situation in Africa, as opposed to an idea coming to us from external?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, John. Victor or Verengai, do we have more questions, please, from the panel? And if these to the panel, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Victor, Verengai.
Victor, do you want to go first? I have 3 more that I have.
No, you can go.
Go ahead.
Okay, great. There's a question here that says, most of the panelists have recommended necessary actions on the part of governments. How do we intend to push for implementations within a period of time in order to enhance growth and the positive impact? And then there's a question that is addressed to private sector, and it says, what are the avenues for private sector in the field of automation, cloud, or agile collaboration with African governments or African institutions? Let me pause there and ask Victor to chip in.
Victor, please chip in.
Yeah, so far I'm seeing just one question in French that's just being posted.
Yeah.
So
French, yes, go ahead.
I'm reading it right away, so
go ahead.
There was another one, Victor, let me stop you here because there was another one before that. I can read it.
Go ahead.
Pourquoi les DXP ne sont pas encore une réalité dans tous les pays avec des points de concentration régionaux fonctionnels? En d'autres termes, est-il possible d'être toujours en communication en Afrique si tous les canaux d'Internet mondiaux sont coupés?
All the worldwide internet channels are cut. The question that you asked, I'm going to allow Eddie to respond to it, as well as Dawood to explain, answer to the question. Eddie, it's over to you. Please answer. Thank you very much. I can respond in French. The question was in French. I think that today IXPs are becoming a reality more than in the past, and a lot of effort that was made in the various governments, even at the African Union Commission level, are aimed at encouraging these IXPs, and there are a lot of new exchange points that are real. The exchange points also require a lot of time to function, and in order to have the capacity with the various hubs. And in terms of the figures, we've gone more than half of the different African countries, and we know that there are countries that people are considering having common or consider these concentration points as a risk, and we are continuing this debate on the continent. COVID, in a certain way, has highlighted the importance of the digital economy and that more can be done online. And we say very often that we need to improve our product locally rather than having just imports, but there's a lot that needs to be done on whether if the international channels are cut and will Africa remain online. When you look at a map of Africa, you are seeing a lot of undersea connections, and so the potential is great. And if everything was to be cut, of course it would affect us, but it doesn't mean that we can't address this. For instance, when you look at coastal countries, if the traffic comes through Nigeria and it's coming to Portugal, for instance, I think that at the moment that it is important for us to continue to work in order to optimize the various networks. Generally, you'll find that the quantity of the traffic is increasing, and it's important to look at methods and means, or rather channels that are much shorter, and we hope these will be cheaper. Thank you very much. Now, with just 1 minute to add something, I think, as Eddie said, with this pandemic, we have had to think. For instance, they were saying that previously, you will see that today we are all African, we're all connected, but unfortunately, I'm not sure that the traffic is going outside the continent. I'm hoping that one day, if there is a case of trafficking outside of Africa, we're able to do that. There is a lot of work that's been done by the African Union and Internet Society for a number of decades. I think today's Africa is very different with regards to the internet to what it was in the past, but there's still work to be done. And I think that things will speed up because a lot of people have kind of woken up because of the situation. Thank you very much.
Berengai, could you repeat the question, please?
Okay.
On the private sector question.
The question says, what are the avenues for private sector in the field of automation, cloud, or agile collaboration with African governments and African institutions?
Yes. Okay. So basically, many African countries have already their own industry development agencies that support ICT businesses in Africa to deliver according to the strategies of their governments. What we can see is, what we wish to have is a more consolidated strategy where we African ICT companies see together the need and the strategy and the activities on the level of the African continent, so we can put together more collaboration among us and between us and the governments in Africa. The fact is that many projects taking place in digital transformation in Africa are the same in all the 50 more African countries, 54, 55 African countries. So the fact is that investing in accumulating knowledge, experience, and solutions by a company can well be placed to serve and deliver in a better way in more than one country the same solution successfully. So what we wish is not just to have industry and ICT industry development agency in each country, but to have more consolidation within that, so we can grow our ICT companies much faster. And for this, one of the suggestions is just to make sure that we have, if we are able to do so, a consolidated ecosystem. You know, ICT companies in Africa are facing many challenges, despite that they are having a lot of opportunities. Those challenges are coming from relating their ability to deliver to the market. So the more we are able to connect them with the market needs, the more they are going to flourish and to grow. Also, they have an issue with the finance. So the more we are able to provide venture capital financing, angel fund financing, the more we are able to help them deliver what is required. And the more we need also to help management and scarce resources development, so that we can have, especially with the clear need of digital transformation, mature companies delivering solutions all over Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Osam. Thank you very much, Osam. Funke, there was two things said previously by David with regard to the content itself, that he hoped that there will be no traffic going outside. And there was the issue of the how the government can really help the private sector. Your company is doing two things. One, you have one of the biggest data center hosting African contents. Do you think that there is a lot of perspective for you really to grow in this area so we can avoid traffic going outside? And second, why do you think that there is an enabling favorable decision taken by the African government to help you to grow? Over to you, Funke.
Thank you. I think interesting question. And in, I would say, the past 3 years, we have seen some global content move onto the continent, but not nearly enough. And I would say generally on the continent, we're consumers of technology. And just like our trade, a lot of the flows have been from Africa into Europe and the Americas and the advanced markets, more so than within Africa. Now, we're seeing, so we consume more of the content from outside the continent than within the continent. We're seeing the content from outside the continent start coming in, but when you look at the relative size of our markets, when you look at the cost and ease of doing business in Africa, when you look at some of the legal frameworks and intellectual property protection, I would say the rate of movement is not near enough to spur the kind of digital transformation or economic development that we would like to see. In addition, the advanced markets are quite aggressive in retaining a lot of these businesses, jobs, infrastructure. So African countries are also competing in that context to have greater participation in those markets and delivering those services. So what can government do, I think, is part of what we've said in terms of policy enablement. I don't believe that strict data domiciliation as regulation is the answer. But I believe more incentives and structures need to be put in place to encourage content and services to be delivered from within the continent for jobs to be created. I also believe more support needs to be given to content when you look at the issues of digital literacy and access for more of our people, providing services in local languages, providing content in local languages, and trying to bring more of our informal sectors into the digital economy. And I think those are areas where government has to play an active role. But African businesses are competing, collaborating with much larger businesses from more advanced economies. And if we're going to get more participation, it's going to require concerted effort and deliberate strategies.
Thank you very much. Okay. John has said it very well. He said, if we can do it during the COVID time, we could do it all the time by really providing soft regulations and facilitate everything. I think that was a very good one on this. At this juncture, I would like to just to invite some few speakers from the floor, and I have seen a few hands up, and the first one was actually up, was Nazirius Kirama. Can we make him talk? Go ahead, Nazarius Kirama. What is your question, please, or your comment? Nazarius? Yes. Go ahead. To the point, and to whom you are addressing comment or question. Hello? Yes, we not very good, but barely. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hi.
No, Kirama, I have to mute you since you are. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead, talk.
I have.
No, I have to jump over you since we are not hearing you very well.
Hello? Is that during this call, do we have dialogue?
Go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
My question is, during COVID-19, do we have any data from the telecom operators that shows that the telecom operators were stretched and then recover from the surge number of people who were going online?
Thank you very much. Jean-Robert, a member of the AU Advisory Cybersecurity Group. I see your hands up. Do you have a question? Jean-Robert.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes. I hope
Yes.
you are coping very well with all that happening where you are now.
Yeah, it's okay.
We can all we can, and we want to breathe. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I have 3 questions.
Yes.
My first question is for Mr. Kayura. I would like to know if you have seen an increase of membership and IP address allocation during the COVID-19 outbreak. My second question is for everyone, so you may choose who want to answer. So most of the equipment that network operators or businesses use are manufactured outside of Africa. So I would like to know if the operators or even the businesses have faced some supply chain issue during the COVID-19, and how we can work to incentivize government to work together with the private sector to put in place some incentive for the emergence of more businesses. And my third question is for Mr. Kaba and also for my colleague Nena. We have been, and I'm talking about Africa Cert, we have been doing a couple of vulnerability assessment and penetration testing on few of the COVID-related applications that have been put in place. So for Mr. Kaba, have you, at least how can we work together to promote basic hygiene rule and application security practice through your platform, both in terms of education, but also to promote some open source tooling that can be used by the developer to test the application that they are putting in place? And to Nena, how can we work in terms of policy implication for more education and promotion of basic hygiene rule in the African cyberspace? Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And the last one is Abdi Muhammad Warsam. Abdi Muhammad Warsam, what is your question or comment? Go ahead. Abdi Muhammad? No reaction. So then Adil Suleiman.
Yes, my question goes to Dr.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, my question goes to Dr. Nana about how do we make sure that we realize this kind of digital transformation when we look at countries who are doing well, like Rwanda. Do we think we can learn a lesson about Rwanda in terms of digital transformation?
All right. Last question, Adil Suleiman, please.
Yes, can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I want to first of all, I want to thank the presenters. I find the presentation very informative. Thank you very much. And I think the presentations highlighted one obvious gap, which is the access gap. And I think there were some suggestions about how to go about it in terms of having public-private partnerships and so forth, and some incentive to the business, so that make it easy for business SMEs to enter into the market and so forth. But more and more, we see that because of this gap, because of this vacuum, we see foreign companies, right? They are trying to fill this gap. And I think this is giving me a lot of concern, because when they come, of course, they want to serve their business interest, and not necessarily African interest. And I would like to hear from like Funky or Eddie or John, how they view that, and
that a large spectrum. Each one of them, please.
One of them, yes, one of them, to see how this is going to impact. I see it even as a threat and not as a solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Abdul Karim. Abdul Karim. I lost his. Go ahead, Abdul Karim. No. Okay, at this. Hello. At this juncture, probably I will have to hand it back to the.
Oui, bonsoir à tout le monde.
Oui,
merci, Mokhtar,
Good afternoon, everybody.
m'avoir donné la parole.
Thank you, Mokhtar,
Donc,
for
ma
giving me the
question
floor.
est quelles sont les contributions
My
des
question
opérateurs mobiles
What
et
are
les
the
régulateurs pour réduire le coût
contributions of
d'Internet
the
pour les
regulators
internautes
and
africains?
operators to
Et
reduce
aussi, le deuxième
the
volet de ma
cost of the
question,
internet
contribuer
in
à la
Africa?
sensibilisation de
My
la
second
population
question
sur les
is
dangers
to
du
contribute
COVID-19.
to
Est-ce que les
sensitize
opérateurs
the
envoient des
population on
SMS,
the
etc. Donc,
dangers of
c'est ça ma question. Je vous remercie.
COVID-19. Who is this question addressed to? Is it Funke who wants to take up your question, or everybody?
any of the questions you think that is you deem responsible, and 1 minute for you to wrap up. How about that? And I will start that by I will start by Andire. And use the opportunity to take 1 minute to wrap up, please. So you have total 3 minutes, please.
Thank you. I will wrap up very quickly. Colleagues, what I can say is that the global internet architecture today is driven by high concentration of big data using hyperscale and tier 4 in particular. 5G is going to be cloud native. And therefore, for us as the Africans, driving cloud either from the government side, what is called GovCloud or Edge Cloud, is critical. And therefore, the whole of the internet traffic is going to hyperscale. We need to build centers where we will have 3 or 4 hyperscale facilities in the African continent. This will also help reduce cybercrime. This will also be able to build a new architecture of the internet in the African continent. I therefore would say that all the tools, all the open source tools that were talked about by Jean Robert, we have them in our platform. We will engage with him privately to make sure that this must happen. My last shot is that Africa must go to the cloud, and that is really what the big issue is everywhere in the world. We cannot be late in this global drive of cloud. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hossam, 2 minutes to answer, 1 minute to wrap up, please. Go ahead, Hossam.
To answer regarding foreign companies, international companies having the opportunity more than the African companies in Africa, there is no problem about that as long as it is well planned to make a proper know-how transfer and proper partnership with African companies so that gradually African companies are able to lead on the project in Africa. This is very important. Simply my 2 cents on what we are saying, having an information technology knowledge hub is very important. We need to share best practices, successful projects, challenges and opportunities. Another thing is, in order to move faster in delivering digital transformation projects in Africa, we need to move from telecommunication regulatory authority to digital transformation regulatory authority in order to emphasize on the results, which is now delivering services to citizens. For companies and SMEs in Africa to grow and to cherish, we need to have better consolidated ecosystem that looks at connecting the market needs with the available companies and also supporting the financing and human resource development of our companies in order to have our companies ready to deliver the 2030 SDGs and the 2063 goals. Thank you.
Thank you very much. John, go ahead. You have 2 minutes to answer to any of the questions, and then 1 minute to wrap up, please.
Thank you very much. I think one of the questions that has been raised is what lessons we can draw from countries that like Rwanda that seems to be leapfrogging quite well. I think the greatest lesson that we can draw is the lesson of leadership. With the leadership, you can achieve what you want to achieve. And that relates to the question that was raised to me about, forms of connectivity, including, of course, community network. I would dare say that models or forms of connectivity don't fail. It is people who manage them that fail. And so whether universal service funding is a model that is suitable for Africa is not in question. It is how the systems have been managed that is in question. And so the case of Rwanda about leadership comes to play very well. And in concluding, I would dare say that if we can do it because of COVID-19, If we can improve connectivity because of the challenges brought to us by connectivity, I mean COVID-19 challenges, why can't we manage it that way as a way of life to improve connectivity, as a policy choice, as a regulatory measure in Africa? That really is my parting shot, that if we can do it because of COVID, we should be able to do it as a way of life. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. Nena, please, 2 minutes to answer the question, 1 minute to wrap up.
Thank you very much, Mokhtar. I will just add to what John has said and permit me to answer or address this question from a legal perspective. Now, in terms of learning lessons, I think the huge issue with Africa is a question of prioritization. We are yet to prioritize cybersecurity and so many cyber issues. It is a question of priority. It's a question of capacity as well. I tend to say that we can't achieve digital transformation if we cannot look at issues like promulgating digital rights laws. It is in digital rights laws that we begin to embed questions of access, questions of digital literacy, and so many other issues we've all discussed. And so countries like Rwanda have prioritized these issues. Permit me to say that so many of our leaders are not digitally literate themselves. So how do they then engage in raising awareness or trying to engage in digital transformation? So it is a question of priority first, and then we begin to look at capacity development. Secondly, the issue of working together to implement policy. The gap in Africa is digital cooperation. I find it amusing that nations begin to ratify Budapest Convention. I say this over and over again. We are ratifying Budapest Convention. We have not ratified our own cybersecurity convention. Charity begins at home.
Right.
At that point, when we begin to ratify our own laws, we can then engage in more roundtables to discuss harmonization of policies, cooperation and coordination with stakeholders. We must first seek cooperation, implementation of policies here at home before we go outside. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I wish I could have applaud, but that is not for with regard to the matter on Budapest and Malabo Convention. Funke, over to you. 2 minutes to answer questions, 1 minute to wrap up, please.
All right, thank you. I'll just go to some of the earlier questions. Did the gains of increased traffic compensate for the losses telecom sector private operators are experiencing? I would say largely, and where most sectors of the economy are expected to go into recession or deep recession this year, I think the ICT sector is one that's going to be very minimally impacted, if it is impacted at all. I think we're yet to see the final results. Supply chain issues, given most of the equipment is coming from outside the continent, what we're seeing are that the supply chains are proving quite resilient. International logistics companies are still working. The ports getting things out are a little bit slower, but supply chains have not been nearly impacted as our local markets and the capacity of citizens have been impacted. Finally, on the issue of incentives to business and foreign companies filling our gaps, I think be they foreign companies or local companies, I think what our governments sometimes tend not to realize is that the profit agenda of a private company cannot be the national development agenda. And when we think of digital transformation, which is so critical to the competitiveness of Africa and our economies in the future, and creation of jobs for our young people, we cannot leave it to the profit objective of companies, be they SMEs, be they large African companies, or be they global multinationals who have more capacity than perhaps any individual African government, who have more cash reserves than some of our governments. And so we really need policies. And when we look at COVID, we also actually see increased nationalism that is taking place across the globe. So if we're going to be competitive in the future, if we're going to create jobs, if we're going to grow our economies, we need public policies that ensure that investments are better aligned with this digital transformation development agenda. It's not going to happen just by issuing more licenses or opening up our markets. It's going to happen through deliberate strategies. And we see it already with services in our high net worth urban areas compared with the rural areas. We see it in the rate of formalization of our economies. We see it in the educational gap. And so these are really public policy issues. The implementation may be through private sector, but there needs to be greater public policy involvement and strategic action if we're going to achieve the kind of digital future that the average African child deserves.
Thank you very much, Funke. David, over to you, 2+1. Go ahead. David.
Thank you. I think we have learned a lot of lessons during these COVID times. For example, we have seen that things that we have been negligent about, like giving access to every African, made us cost a lot. There are many students currently that are not going to school, even online, because of lack of access. So I think we have to revisit that when the pandemic is over or even before. And I think we have learned as well that when we have to do things, we can do them. It's just that we tied our hands ourselves. Well, Funke said that in the supply chain has not been disturbed that much for the ICT sector, but there are some sectors where the supply chain has been affected. One of it is in the health sector. And I am surprised, for example, that things that we were importing, now we can do them locally. Masks, of course, are produced in mass locally and by modern companies that used to, produce clothes for, for the foreign markets. But some really advanced equipment like ventilators are being produced locally. So I think we were producing under our capacity. And as John said, we were really limiting ourselves with rules and regulations that were really handicapping us. And I think we have to open our eyes and see what we can do to make the post-pandemic era an era for the internet and other technologies to flourish. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Eddie, over to you. We started with you. We'll conclude with you. Go ahead.
Thank you very much again. And to answer some of the questions that were directly addressed to AFRINIC, we did not see a surge in membership during this period, membership requests. And I think it's normal when we see that the new members generally come from new companies that are opening up or new businesses that are opening up. And during the pandemic, we mainly maintain what is existing. And I think this has been a lesson for preparedness. If I speak on the preparedness on the continent, to be able, because in some cases, we don't have time to fix or to address this. And this is what happened with this pandemic. I saw it as when you receive a punch in the face. Yes, sometimes people lose a bit the direction, but it's important that we all stand up and see how we can address the situation that we don't know how long it's going to last, because we don't know how long it's going to stay. And even if it is fixed, what is the new normal that's going to be? So we really need to address and adjust quickly. And as I like what John said also, when that there are so many things that used to be there that now all of a sudden they disappeared, and we simplify a lot of things. And I really think that it is high time for us to keep on working on improving in our local infrastructures and improve the internet and reduce the level of dependency and the requirement to import internet in our places, and reduce the prices and make sure that this connectivity is there supporting the digital transformation that we expect to see and that we really all deserve. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I have nothing to say but just applauding all of you, and again express my appreciation for all you have said, done, and your contribution, your valuable contribution to this first webinar. Just a few takeaways. First of all, we have learned that there was a traffic change and behavior change from the users' point of view with regard to the internet. And we have also seen that from the regulatory point of view, there is a softening of licensing and type approval equipment and so on. And we are happy to learn that probably the recession will not be really affecting the ICT sector, although the supply chain has been distributed here and there. We have learned also that it is very important to consider our cyber culture and address the matter of our cyber legislations and cyber security strategies in general. It is very important to know and to mention that we're still weak from cyber security point of view, and there is a lot to be done with regard to that. From the private sector, we have learned that the digital transformation strategy is worth to invest in, as well as the internet exchange points. And we have shown by a specific example coming from South Africa that we can do it, we can make it, and we have nothing exactly really to envy others, because we Africans are able to make it and to do a lot of things. Two things very important, two major quotations I have learned: that we still have a lot of potentials. We can make it. Our currency is our collaboration and our cooperation, and that we can really, if we can do it now in this difficult situation, we can always make it in the future. With that, I will just wanted to mention that our next webinars will be on Spectrum. It will be really led by, it will be done in cooperation with African Telecommunications Union, again, Mozilla, and the lead team with regard to that will be Steve Sung. On matter related to cybersecurity, the AU Cybersecurity Expert Group will be the lead partner, and the lead focal point will be Adil Suleiman. And that on the complementary access model, APC will be the lead institution, and the coordinator will be Carlos. And then critical infrastructure will be due to a NetHub. The dates are, for the Spectrum will be 18th of June, mark your calendar please. For the cybersecurity will be 2nd of July. And for the access models will be 16th of July. And 30th of July will be the one in NetHub, and we'll be saying exactly who will be in charge in terms of a person who will be coordinating all of that. With that, I will again thank you very much, and my apology for the.
Sorry, Makta, there's something you need to say before you wind up.
Yes, go ahead.
There was a question by one of the participants on the chat, saying, how do whatever we do in these policy forums, webinars, get to be implemented or to be passed to our member states?
Yes, and thank you. And thank you for reminding me that.
You need to deal with that.
Yes, indeed. Here, what's going to happen here, there's a team that will be providing really, we'll be having a report, and we'll be taking the major recommendations that have been made, and we will upscale them to different stakeholders and institutions for implementation. And thank you for reminding me about that one. With that, I will again thank you very much for your contribution and for your participation, and looking forward to see you in the next webinars. Thank you very much, and all of you can log off now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.